All right, hello everyone. Welcome to our first episode of 2024. Stephen Barr and
Hey
Robert
everyone.
Ferrarium.
Hey everyone. Welcome to 2024.
Oh wow!
It's exciting. We've been doing this show now for a little over a year now, correct? When did we start the very
About a
first
year and a
episode?
half actually.
Year and a half
We
ago.
started, let's see, the summer of 2022. Wow.
Feels a while, but I think with every new year, it feels like we get a ref, a more of a, you know, makeover, a little bit of a refresh of how we do the show. And I'm really looking forward to what we do this year. Let
Yeah,
me just kick it off with
absolutely.
what did you do what did you do for New Year's? How was New Year's
Well,
and Christmas?
let's see. We went to my parents' place for New Year's, and they live. They have a good view of the fireworks from where they are, and so we stayed,
Yeah.
and that was really fun. But then apparently a lot of other people had the idea that their general area has a good view of the fireworks, and there was a traffic jam, so we couldn't leave till 3:30 in the morning. Literally just traffic jam in front of their place. So that only happens once a year. Um, and so you can imagine
Nice.
keeping the kids out that late. We paid for it for the next couple of days, but it was still a fun experience. What about you? How was your New Year's?
It was actually relatively quiet and good in that sense. Our kids decided to abandon us, and they decided that they wanted to spend New Year's at my parents' place, which is in the city. So they kind of left us alone, and it was good downtime for us to kind of just after reinvent things had still been pretty hectic. So we just got a whole lot of rest, took some time off. So yeah, it was actually nice and relaxing, and came back into 2024 all energized. So lots of interesting things happening, a lot of interesting content that we're working on, a lot of interesting stuff on the product that we're working on. There's just so much to talk about, and everything that's happening in the world of AI. I mean, just keeping up with all of it is really hard. So it's
Yeah,
I'm
who's
really
running
excited for this
OpenAI
year.
now?
I think we need to check every week.
That was quite the saga.
Correct.
I
But
panicked because I
yeah.
saw an updated TechCrunch article. Well, not panicked, but I was like, "Wow, this is strange." And it said Sam Altman was out, and I was like, "Wait a minute, okay." And they were adding to the story um, that happened earlier. I couldn't have done this again in a month.
Yeah, it's no, but it's been a very, very exciting landscape. The number of tools, the number of new abilities, the number of new methodologies, algorithms, and the kinds of use cases that we are starting to see using generative AI are just absolutely fascinating. So, um, yeah, I mean, 2024 promises to be a very, very exciting year, full of things that we haven't seen in the past. So, I am really looking forward to it.
Well, absolutely. Actually, now that you mention it, I posted this on X. I'm just gonna embrace the official name. I posted this on my X yesterday. That there was a neat paper that came out about people's predictions about what AI would do and how those predictions changed over time. Let me share my screen real quick because this is actually kind of neat. Um, here we go. Oh, okay. I am on a new Mac Studio, and so I have to give it permissions to share things. Let's see if I can do this. Okay, there we go. Okay, so this paper is on Archive, and let me zoom in on a
I
little
think we'll
bit.
have
It's
zoom in a bit.
thousands of AI authors on the future of AI, and it was just published. It's a survey of almost 3,000 AI researchers. Let's put the URL here in the chat for people to follow along. Survey of almost 3,000 AI researchers asking, what do you think AI will be able to do? And basically, what they're saying is people are moving their estimates forward in time. So let's see.
Yeah,
People are
let's zoom in on
guessing.
that chart.
Okay,
Yeah.
here we go. People are now guessing. So this was last year's survey, and this is this year's survey. So people are saying AI will be able to write a New York Times best-selling fiction piece last year. Okay, last year they said it was by the year just to get the scale here. So at the end of this is 2035. So this is about 2040 at this end. So they said that this would happen in 2040. Now they've bumped that back to 2030.
Yeah.
When
I
the
think we're almost there.
math
We are starting to see a
competition.
lot of books come out, which are just completely AI written.
Have you read them? Or maybe you don't know.
I don't know. It's every book still has the name of an author, but I'm guessing that right now a lot of the content that comes up in books and blog posts and stuff is either generated or critiqued and reworked by AI. So I actually see that as a very standard thing to do today.
Yeah, definitely. Well, even this one, look, top 40 pop song. I would say this happened like 5 years ago, but let's see. That's
Top
they're
40 pop
estimated that.
songs with all songs generated by AI. I think lyrics generated by AI, yes. Entire songs generated by AI. I thought Google just released, or YouTube particularly, just released some very interesting capabilities about a month ago, where it can generate and write songs in the style of a particular artist, and you can use that as your if you're subscribed to YouTube, you can use that as your content, your whatever rights free background music for whatever videos that you're creating. So there's some very exciting use cases coming out of some of the music related generative AI capabilities.
Yeah, music and also video.
Yeah.
Video Gen
And
AI
video as well.
is
Exactly.
really cool.
This is
Let's
fascinating.
see, translate text in a new found language. That's estimated by what 2030 on this axis. Yeah, 2035. The only one that's I'm trying to see if there's any red to blue. That means that we've changed the
Read
prediction the
text
other way.
aloud. Read text aloud. Transcribe speech. Translate text. Top 40 songs. Equations
Okay.
governing virtual worlds. Actually, most of
Okay,
them.
so red
Most of them
no,
have
it's
them
red to
flipped.
blue means that this is sorry, blue to red. I was looking backward. So
Sorry.
good high school history essay, that's blue to red.
Kids are already
All
doing that
Atari
today.
games versus pro game tester, fold laundry. So these are the ones where the estimate's moving further into the future.
Yeah.
Top StarCraft play via video of screen. World
I
Series of
think that
Poker.
we're getting very close to that. Some of the video capabilities of GPT-4 Vision are pretty interesting, and what people are doing with it is also pretty fascinating.
This one, I will actually ask you about this one. Assemble Lego given instructions. We have moved that estimate out, like 3 or 4 years.
I think that would be solvable today. Right?
So that's what I thought. Okay, do they mean the mental aspect of it or the actual physical having a robot with the dexterity to do it?
I think if you provided the instructions in a systematic manner of what gets assembled in what order, I think this is doable. So I don't know whether you've looked at this app called Brickit. My kids use it a lot, and we discovered it about a year or so ago. Brickit is really neat because we have this big, tubs of Lego pieces. We just lay it all on the floor, and then we take a picture with our phone, and then the app basically looks at all the pieces that are on the floor and then finds models that you can make with the pieces that it sees. And it'll tell you the locations of those very specific pieces on the floor, and you can pick the model that you want to create, and it'll then pull up the instructions for you to follow, and you can pick up the pieces from the image. It'll tell you where those pieces are and what you can make with it. It's pretty fascinating. It's called Brickit. It's an app on iOS. I don't know if it's on Android, but it is actually very, very good.
Interesting. This is reminding me of Mike Chambers of AWS, who a few years ago wrote recognition. Oh yeah, okay. So let me share this other tab. 1 second here. Remove that, and then let's see, present, share screen. Here we go. This is Mike Chambers, and he's using Bricket.io preview release, recognition.bricket.io. This is a Lego brick classifier using AWS Recognition. He's showing how the pipeline works here. So Lego, image, API gateway, Lambda, recognition.
You'd be amazed as to what it can do with a big pile of these, the Lego pieces just laid out on the floor. It actually does a pretty amazing job of picking up specific pieces and saying, here's what you can make with it. And it's amazing to see kids actually do that. And like, they've stopped coming and pestering us to buy a new set, because just with the existing set of pieces, they can do tons already.
Okay, so if you have so you can lay them all out on the floor at once, take this big overhead picture, and then that's what you get?
Correct. And it doesn't even have to be, right overhead. It actually understands, parallax, and it'll handle all of that stuff, and it'll find the right pieces.
That is really, really cool. All right, I'll have to have a look at that.
Yeah, I think it's a free app. We've been using it a lot, and it's totally worth it. Another very interesting one in the area of AI, and this has existed for almost 2 years now, 2 or 3 years. There's this app on iOS called Nada Sadhana, and it won the best app award, I think, a year and a half ago, on iOS.
All right, you're gonna have to put this in the chat.
Yeah, let me see if I can very quickly find it. It's an app actually for just one second. Yeah, it's actually an app for Indian classical music, where the accompaniments for Indian classical music are very jazz-like, in that it's in the spur of the moment. The variations and stuff will depend on how people are. I'm posting this in the comments here. You can probably bring this up. So all your accompaniments of your classical music recital, which is all very impromptu. It's all very, in the spur of the moment, you decide which way to go. It's very jazz-like. And so having an AI understand what you are doing, whether it be pitch, whether it be rhythm, whether it be pace, all of that stuff, it adapts and it basically plays all the accompanying music in real time. And this has been around for about a couple of years, and it's pretty amazing.
Okay, so it's almost like, I used to play in jazz band, and it's the same thing. You do these improv sessions where you've got the bass, the piano, and the guitar. They're all kind of vibing off of each other, and they provide like a platform. But you get this. It's hard to tell. It's not quite telepathic, but there's this like understood communication between the players of when you're going to switch, when you're going to slow down, when you're going to speed up, when you're going to yield to the other performer, because they're gonna, they had 16 measures, but they're in a groove, so they're gonna go for another 16. All that stuff is kind of in the air. And so you're saying this is kind of going to pick up on that, just like
it picks up all of that stuff really well. Yeah,
that's really cool.
It's really amazing. There are recorded performances of people using this, and actually, recording and sharing performances with it. It's pretty amazing.
All right, I'm gonna have to look this up.
Yeah. This is primarily for Indian classical music. I don't know if there's an equivalent one for Western music as well.
Neat.
Okay, so what do we have on the agenda for today, Stephen?
Well, I think the first thing we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about RDS proxy, and then we're going to talk about an update to CloudFix, also concerning databases. And then finally, we're going to talk about AWS Config and serverless, the interaction between them, and some surprises that, well, I guess would surprise you in terms of how these costs can change, and even is it a good idea to monitor serverless resources? So we'll get into that. Let's share the RDS proxy. Let me share my tab here.
Yeah, so since this is the very first episode, it looks like even the folks at AWS have been taking a little bit of a break. There haven't been any big, exciting announcements over the last 2 weeks or 3 weeks. I think a large number of them came out during reInvent, so that's been good. And then there's been just a bunch of rollout-related announcements that have come up over the last 2 or 3 weeks. This one, I wanted to pull this one up in particular because it's just a reminder of one of the best practices that a lot of folks miss when it comes to how they use RDS. Specifically, people who are just, new to AWS. When they come in, they see a database, they see an EC2 instance. The first instinct is to connect the instance or Lambda directly to the database. But you should almost always use an RDS proxy in the middle whenever you're using these databases for 2 reasons. One is it decouples your applications from the database. And the second one is that what that does for you is if ever you need to upgrade your database, you can do that seamlessly behind the RDS proxy. The RDS proxy, even if there's a little bit of a downtime in your database as it is rebooting or resizing or scaling up or even getting to the latest generation or moving to Graviton, any of those scenarios, the RDS proxy will actually cache all of your requests for a certain amount of time, so that while the instance is coming back up, it can service it. The RDS proxy could also service a lot of your read requests via the read replicas while the master write instance is actually being restarted. So it allows for your applications to have a much higher level of resilience. The second thing that it does is it actually gives you far better performance for your applications. Now, especially when you're using services like Lambdas to connect to your database, your Lambdas are probably going to last about half a second, 500 milliseconds at most. In that 500 milliseconds, there's about 200 to 300 milliseconds that is spent in just setting up a connection between your Lambda and the database. And you don't want to keep doing that every single time. It's a very expensive operation in the grand scheme of processing that little bit of data that you're doing with the Lambda.
Wait, so you're saying this is 60% of your execution time is just
in a bunch of cases
database overhead?
Just the database connection establishment alone could be as much as 60 to 80% of your Lambda execution time, right? And not to mention that if you have a lot of scale, then you're actually, constantly hitting the database with thousands of connections at the same time. And more than the data access and, performance of the data retrieval from the database, just the connections alone can use up all the CPU on those database instances. So you have to get to bigger and bigger instances, just trying to keep up with all of these Lambdas. So the approach that you take is you have an RDS proxy. The RDS proxy has a pool of pre-established connections with the database, so you don't have any of that overhead anymore, and you are ready to actually start transacting with your database almost immediately when you use the RDS proxy. So it actually saves you a ton of cost, gives you far better performance when you use the RDS proxy. Now, it's not something that everyone talks about very often. So because we saw this announcement about RDS proxy now being available in AWS Europe, particularly Spain, I thought it would be a good idea to bring that up and share that with everyone. If you are using an RDS database, please use the RDS proxy. It's going to save you tons of money. It's going to be, you can actually utilize much smaller instances of your databases to get equivalent performance. So you just get rid of a ton of overhead.
Does it do any caching?
No, the caching is built in your application layer. So you would typically build caching into your application layer.
So check Elasticache first.
Yes. So you'd use Elasticache. That's something that your application will have to deal with. So at the point when you decide to make a SQL call, at that time, the process is, in traditional applications, you establish, if it's serverless, the problem is that you would first have to establish a connection, then, make sure the handshake is all done. After you've done that, then you pass on the query, retrieve the results, and then you close the connection. But most people don't realize that the overheads of setting up the connection and then closing it at the end is incredibly large if you're only going to transact one SQL query with it.
And it might be something, and that's where it's really easy when you're writing naive code, right? You think, okay, I want to look up one fact from a database. I don't want to do anything complicated. I'm just looking up a mapping between username and UUID or something like that, right? Where it's a really quick thing, and you still have all that overhead. And so with
Yes.
RDS proxy, it's already established the connection. And so you have to establish a connection with the RDS proxy, but it's not as heavy because that's just a service.
And setting up the connection on the server side is actually a very expensive operation in terms of the CPU and memory that it uses up, particularly CPU. Because every time you establish a connection, it has to do a bunch of lookups. It has tables that it maintains because the connections are one of the most important things in a database. If the database has given you a connection, it tries its best to make sure that it is going to be persistent. It's going to stay around for a while, but then you're using it in almost like an anti-pattern of how databases have been optimized to perform. So if you just go to constantly hit it with a connection open and close, most databases are not designed to handle that the same way. We've been doing connection pools in Java for decades now for the same reason.
Yeah.
And connections are designed to stay long lasting. And so connection pools have been a concept that have been around for at least 2 or 3 decades, as long as I can remember. So think of this as a connection pool for RDS.
Now, are there proxies, or there will be proxies for something like document DB or Neptune? Do you think that's a thing that's also needed for the same reason, or is this unique to RDS and SQL
I think it's
File
unique
Database?
to RDS for a reason that a lot of the other services, whether it's DynamoDB, DocumentDB, the connection is actually an HTTP, it's a TCP connection. The layer at which and the kind of connections that are being made are very different. So when you make a call to DynamoDB, it's just an HTTP call that you're making. You're not really establishing a connection in the sense of how it is done at practically layer 7, in the stack when it comes to databases. So you're making connections, but at a much lower level of the OCI stack when it comes to services like DynamoDB or DocumentDB or Neptune or any of these. RDS in particular, because it's the way they are designed, the connection mechanism there is very different.
That makes a lot of sense, and I guess it's a holdover from databases, especially SQL databases, are very old technologies. And
yes, they've been around for 50 years. So there are certain way that they operate. Yeah.
All right. Well, RDS proxy. Make sure to use your RDS proxy, and if you are using the Spain region, now you can.
Yep. And I'm going to tee this up because I think one of the things that we're going to discuss shortly is going to be related, which is whenever you're upgrading your RDS instance, one of the big risks is, are things going to work when things come back on or not, right? And you have downtime to deal with. RDS proxy protects you against that. It acts as a buffer. Connections that are set up, because RDS proxy now holds the connection for you, you don't really care that the database has gone down and comes back up. It'll just queue up all of those requests. It'll store it. As soon as your database is back up, it will start processing all of those requests in the queue. So it's pretty neat. It allows upgradability. A lot of reasons why people don't upgrade their databases and keep living with the old patches is because it's hard. Any downtime on the database is considered absolutely critical. So the only way you are actually going to stay up with all the latest technologies, all the latest patches, all the latest efficiencies that come with newer versions of the database is if you're actually able to regularly upgrade your database. And RDS proxy makes it really simple to do just that.
And especially from a security standpoint, right? Running,
yes,
you want to stay up to date. It's I think we've all remember when the stack was the LAMP stack with what was that? Like running a WordPress blog with MySQL behind, right? If you weren't up to date, your site could be defaced in a day.
Correct.
if you didn't, update your security. Well, that's a really neat
Completely.
idea, right? The RDS proxy can manage the connection pooling. And again, that shows how different SQL databases are. It's okay if that query hangs for a little bit, and even
Yes.
it can do a handover of a database. Queries can take a long time. I guess we're used to instant gratification, instant results, set a 1 second timeout, but that's not how it always is.
Correct. I mean, you could have queries that need to scan millions of rows before they produce a result and do joins across hundreds of tables, and that's what SQL servers or SQL databases are designed to do really well. So I think it's totally fine. Just dropping connections is a bad thing with databases. So applications can behave in all kinds of erratic ways when something like that happens. So
yeah, for sure.
RDS proxy is an incredibly easy way to build in long-term efficiency and good architecture into your database usage mechanisms. So do it from the get-go. Don't wait for a later date to turn it on. There's just advantages, tons of advantages to having this in place.
Absolutely. I wonder if Code Whisperer, when you were writing a CloudFormation template with an RDS instance and a Lambda function, it should suggest to you, hey, we should put an RDS proxy here in the middle.
I don't think it does that in general. So RDS proxy absolutely 100% makes sense whenever you're using a production database. It may not be that relevant when you're using a non-production DB. But if you ever have a production database and a production workload, RDS proxy is a must. And unfortunately, Code Whisperer has no mechanism of figuring out whether the database that you're setting up in a CloudFormation script is going to be a production database or not.
Unless you have prod in the database name.
Yes. Yeah, that would be a good tag to watch out for.
Cool. Well, how should we rate this one?
So I think this is an old one. I like the I like RDS proxy as a service. I'd give this a 3.5. It's not a new announcement or a blog. This is just an announcement about a rollout.
Yeah.
RDS proxy as a service is a 5-star service. So please go ahead and use it and make sure that it's there in every production workload. It's going to save you a ton of time. It's going to save you a ton of money and a ton of effort as you have to deal with upgrades and patches and cost efficiency exercises in the future.
Yeah, definitely check that out. That seems really good. All right, let's take a quick break, and we come back. Let's talk about the new CloudFix feature.
Great.
Just recently released, retyping to Graviton. We will be right back in about a minute.
Sounds good.
Some tools just find AWS cost savings and make you do all the work. Visualizing cost opportunities is great, but that's not enough. CloudFix, on the other hand, actually delivers those savings for you. And you don't need to worry because CloudFix is AWS recommended and easy to use. It's the only tool that fixes cost-saving opportunities and not just finds. It's the easiest way to save money on AWS. It's all 100% automatic and risk-free. And the best part of all, it works non-stop. Stop overspending on AWS and click on the button to start saving now.
All right, we are back. Before we get back into it, I was just looking outside. We had this crazy windstorm last night. I was a little tired.
Oh wow!
All night. It's one of those where I was looking at the porch and our plants are strewn everywhere, and it's one of those things. But then we were supposed to get snow by the end of the week, so that's always exciting. I don't know if you've been in Seattle for a snow, but it's a disaster every single time.
I have, and I heard just a couple of days ago, as I was talking to my brother, he said Seattle has generally been much warmer than usual so far. But if
December was really strange.
Yeah.
But of course, we want the cold and miserable weather. That's part of our lifestyle here.
Okay, let's not be miserable with this new fixer that we now have for CloudFix. Tell us
Awesome
more about it,
transition.
Stephen.
All right. Well, this one is doing retyping to Graviton. Now, we are big fans of Graviton. The Graviton is, just a quick recap, is AWS's custom silicon. It is based on the ARM architecture. They are now on their 4th generation with the R8G instance. It's amazing. There are 3 generations of Graviton in the wild now. There's the 6G, so there's C, M, and R 6G. There's C, M, and R 7Gs and a couple of variations. And now the R8G, they haven't launched C or M 8G.
No, they haven't.
Yes.
They only announced the Rs at reInvent this year.
I'm sure they will fill out the landscape when they can. The cool thing about Graviton is the price performance because it's lower power, and a lot of what you're paying for an EC2 is, on the variable cost side is power. And so Graviton takes a lot lower power, it's a lot lower energy, so therefore it's cheaper to run. And then Amazon, of course, passes that on to you. So
correct.
And a lot of
I just want to make sure that folks who are listening to this are not getting confused between power and performance. The power consumption is literally the power consumption of the processor that's significantly lower, which reduces the cost, but the performance is pretty awesome. It competes with the best of breed processors that are out there, and therefore the price performance that you get out of these processors is a significant boost over the more traditional Intel and AMD processors. Now remember that these processors are ARM based, and so they do need a different architecture to kind of run, or they are a different architecture on which your applications run. So there might be a few little quirks that you might have to look out for as you're migrating over to Graviton.
Yeah, that's a great distinction, right? Power, not powerful, but how much electricity it takes. And as of note, the famous Macintosh, Mac M series processors, those are also based on the ARM architecture, and that's part of why they can get such phenomenal battery life. Your iPhones are also, almost all phones now are ARM, aren't they?
Pretty much, correct.
It'd be hard to think of one that isn't. So one of the things that we recommend with CloudFix is to switch to Graviton when you can. We have finder fixes that will switch managed services like Elasticache to Graviton. This one is looking at RDS and Aurora instances. So I want to put this
before you jump into that.
Yeah.
While you bring that up, why don't you just bring that up on the screen? And I just want to, for those folks who haven't looked at CloudFix or haven't seen CloudFix, I just want to do a very quick summary and an introduction. So we built CloudFix as a simple tool for folks to actually realize savings on their AWS spend. Now, a large number of tools out there will give you all the insights and dashboards and fancy graphs and all of that stuff. But in our view, what matters the most is how much there is to actually save, which is what we call finders. They find all the potential savings. And there are tons of tools, amazing tools out there that actually do a good job of that. But the most important part is the fixer. How do you actually realize the savings from those particular insights? And that's where CloudFix has focused on. If you ever want to run this analysis on your products, just feel free to sign up with CloudFix. It's absolutely free. You'll get a full assessment. You'll get the full report of exactly all the places where you can save money. It's absolutely free. Just go sign up, try it out on your account. It takes about 5 minutes to onboard your accounts onto it. It's really simple. But the real value, and that's what we want to discuss over here, is the fixers. Where and how do you actually go about in an automated way fixing a lot of these issues? So like Stephen was saying, we are talking about migrating your RDS instances from the x86 architecture, which is Intel or ARM, over to Graviton, right?
Yeah. So like you said, there's all kinds of different finder fixers. They're categorized into different, and this is rough, but easy, medium, advanced, and best practice. The idea being easy, you can just click right away, it'll do it. Whereas medium, it says best performed in an off-peak time, or an advanced in a maintenance window. So it's not so much about how complicated they are, but it's more about making sure that how much planning in advance you need to do for it. So in advance, since we're talking about our database, is this RDS optimized instances finder fixer. So let's click on this one. And what this is going to show is it's going to show things that it's found where transitions can be made. And so looking at here, there's a cost, and this is the cost of running a particular resource, and then the potential savings associated with clicking that button and changing that resource. And so that's pretty significant, right? This is 10% on this particular instance, and we can look at options to figure out exactly what it's trying to do. And so what it's saying here, it's saying there's an R5.large, and it wants to change it to an R6G.large. So let's go look at the pricing for that. Let's see, AWS pricing.
Actually, look for AWS RDS pricing.
You got it. AWS, there we go. Okay,
right.
So
let's look at it by engine. So pick MySQL. Yeah.
And then here.
So depending on engine and depending on the instance, it could actually be very different as well.
Okay, so here is we were at a T4.
No, we were on a R5.
R5.large.
Yeah, we were on an R5 large. So db.r5 large will be further down. There we go. Further down, that list. So the R6 is there. R5.large is 24 cents an hour. And the R6, the db.r6 large.
And this is the R6G.
Okay, R6G.large.
R6G.large
is 21 cents. So it's actually 20% difference. It's nearly 20% difference. 24 cents to 21 cents. So it's a 3-cent difference.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, 17%. Yeah. So it's more significant. I think the 10% was very conservative. This would actually be a 17-18% cost reduction. Now that scales. Like if you're spending a few $1,000s a month on your database, saving anywhere from 15 to 20% on that alone by just clicking one button feels like a very, very easy win. It's something that you should take on right away.
I think with the AWS prices, sometimes they're denoted in such tiny amounts. And so I always think, okay, if I multiplied this by 1,000 or by 10,000, and I think, okay, what is the actual magnitude that we're thinking of? And so looking at this dashboard, like you were saying, the cool thing is this execute button, right? Yeah. You hit this execute button and then it actually goes and does it. This R5 large to a R6G.large. It does the retyping, does the migration. And this is really neat because it is going ahead of generation, and it is switching architectures from the R5 instance to the R6G, so using Graviton. Yeah. And because of that, you get this, you can get this great savings, you get to modernize, and because we've done all the work in the background to make sure that's going to go well, we've tested this many thousands of times on our own workloads. You don't have to, because normally you would hesitate, right? You'd say, okay, is it really worth it? We're going to have to plan this out. We're going to have to test it. We're going to have to spend some engineering resources to really understand this, and just put it on the back burner and continue to pay the high price because we can't afford to test this. But we've already done that testing for you. We've done that. Obviously you still want to do your own due diligence, but you can be assured that this isn't, you're not the only person who's done this.
Correct. Actually, I'll add one other thing. When it comes to a lot of these managed services, AWS is actually the one that's doing a lot of the heavy lifting. So AWS actually does the takes over most of the migration part. So when you say I want to migrate an RDS instance from A to B, AWS is actually doing a lot of that work under the hood. You just have to pass all the right parameters for it to do that. And if it fails for whatever reason, then it'll automatically roll it all back. So it ensures that your services have the least possible risk as they migrate over, and they have all the best practices that have already been created for migrating over from an Intel or an x86 based architecture to a Graviton instance. They are the ones, and it's the mechanics on the AWS side that actually does the migration. So you can be pretty assured that it's very, very thoroughly tested. And so it's a relatively, it's a relative no-brainer to execute on a fixer like that. If it was an EC2 instance, I would say things are different. But when it comes to managed services, AWS has mechanisms to do all of this for you. And that's what CloudFix leverages.
Here's another interesting one. This is going from a T3 to a T4G. And so see, it's keeping it in the same T series, but you're going ahead of generation and switching to Graviton. And again, that's ready.
And these are burstable instances, right? So the T's are all burstable, where you may not have consistent performance on these. So whenever you're using development instances, you should be using T's, because then you can accrue a bunch of credits around your burst capacity while you're actually running tests and stuff like that. But by and large, these will be way cheaper to run. So for dev and staging instances, you should probably use T's. Production, you can move to the R6G or the R7G, or now the R8Gs.
Yeah, and having that support for burstable performances, that's especially when you're developing, right? When you're in production, your workload is smooth. When you're developing, you say, oh, let me test this. I've changed something. Let me run it on all of my elements on the database. And that could be a lot. Speaking of bursting, I was, we're writing a crawler for learning more about AI topics. And I was working on my Hacker News crawler, and I grabbed a bunch of articles really fast, and I think I got throttled. And I need to use a VPN or wait a couple of days before I can use Hacker News again. But that's what happens when you don't have support for burstable performance. All right, so back at CloudFix, this is great. You see all of this potential savings, and this adds up. This adds up a lot, especially because, like you said, Amazon's doing the transition work for you. CloudFix is finding it and is being able to orchestrate the whole thing behind the scenes, so you don't have to worry about writing code to manage this yourself. So that's really, really exciting. All right, so this is the RDS. This is again available under the RDS optimized instances category, and that's just one of many finder fixers. And we've got another one coming next week. We're excited to talk to you about then. There's more ways to save on your database costs, on your EMR costs. So we'll be covering that more next week.
I'll just add one other thing. If you have databases that are running on bare EC2 instances where you have set up the database yourself, your number one exercise should really be, or priority should be, to move them to an RDS instance and go for the latest Graviton-based RDS instances. These are very, very well tested. They work really well. They're managed by AWS. You should not have to patch and manage these instances yourself. So do that and protect your production instances with an RDS proxy between your application and your database. Make sure that that's a number one priority when you deploy these instances. And for any of the old RDS instances, check out CloudFix to see if you can use that to migrate quickly, because the benefits of staying on the latest generation of these instances for all the managed services is an absolute no-brainer. There's tons of money to be saved, anywhere from 15 to 30% in a bunch of cases. So, and invariably, RDS is one of the top 3 spends that I see across most customers. It's something that you want to act on almost immediately. There's tons of money to be saved.
Yeah, absolutely. And what do you think keeps people on the self-managed databases? Is it just kind of a habit, or just an artifact of how they set things up, or sometimes they're using maybe a plugin that they don't have support for?
More often than not, it is that they moved to AWS as part of a lift and shift, and therefore there was a VM that was on premise that ran your server, your database server, and that just moved over to an EC2 instance in AWS as part of the migration process. And sometimes it does require decoupling, and then where you have to move to a different instance type or a different service like RDS. In another case, like I said, the problem with applications being so closely tied to the databases is that migration requires downtime, and then applications can't afford it. So it's really, really hard. You need that layer of abstraction in between your database and application for it to independently upgrade, or for this two to independently upgrade.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. All right. Well, check out CloudFix. Again, like Raul said, you can sign up for free, have a free scan, learn where your cost optimization opportunities are. Yes, cloudfix.com. Yeah. Go check that out. It's easy to get started. You can do it on your own, or of course, reach out to either one of us or any of our team members, and we can have a chat with you or help you out in any way you need. So we're always here for that.
Sounds great.
All right. Should we switch gears to our last topic, which is AWS Config and serverless? I want to bring up the page for AWS Config. What is AWS Config? Just in a nutshell.
So AWS Config is actually a very, very useful service where it records any changes in the configuration of your AWS services. And it allows you to audit them to understand what's actually going on. It allows you to evaluate, or really understand your configuration. So for example, if you had EC2 instances, the only way to actually understand how the EC2 instance is configured is to actually use the AWS EC2 describe instance API. Okay. When you have hundreds of thousands of these instances, you're literally making hundreds of thousands of these individual API calls just to understand what the configuration is. What is the EBS volume attached to it? What kind of ENIs exist over there? What is the IP addresses of those ENIs? What are the volume types that are attached? Which is the boot volume? Which is the, there's so many parameters in the configuration of these instances. Describe instances literally, or used to be the only way to get it. Now, when you're actually trying to analyze all of your spend and you're trying to analyze what's happening to your resources, making those API calls is very, very expensive. Imagine you're 10,000 devices and you are making 10,000 calls every minute just to understand what the state of your services are.
That's going to add up quickly. Plus, you need some code to manage it.
And then you'll hit API limits very quickly.
Compare over time. Yeah.
Right. And then you'll start hitting API limits, and it's going to be a nightmare to do that. So AWS Config is really neat because AWS already has all this information. They just now make it available almost like the curve, right? Like billing data is now available to you as a dump, and you can then use that to do all the analysis you want without the overheads of making all these individual API calls. So AWS Config really helps you manage all of your resource configurations and understand what's happening with them, including changes and edits or updates to them.
And so a lot of what AWS Config is used for is compliance, but also internal monitoring, right? So say you have a lot of developers and they shouldn't be starting GPU-based instances.
Correct.
But someone does. And you can block it at the IAM level, right? You can say they don't have permission to start GPU instances, but say you don't have that or you want to use config to monitor it after the fact. This is one way to be alerted to that fact. Okay, they're starting GPU instances, or people are starting, are using older volume types. So this is, in a sense, you have IAM policy to enforce things before they happen. Then you can also use config to retrospectively understand, well, what just happened, and to understand what those changes are. Then, of course, like every other AWS service, it has a cost based on, well, in this case, it's data, how much data
Correct.
it's gathering.
So let me give you a simpler example. Let's say you wanted to find all the instances that had GP2 volumes attached to it. Okay. And let's say you had 10,000 AWS instances across your accounts. To actually just answer that one question, you would probably need to make 10,000 API calls to each instance and find out what are the attached volumes there, and then what are the volume types for each of those attached volumes, right?
Yeah.
So that's tens of thousands of API calls that you're making to answer that question. Instead, you could literally just use, if you had AWS config turned on, you could query AWS config data to figure out which instances have GP2 based EBS volume, so you can upgrade just those.
So let's have a look at the pricing to understand what's going on here. Okay, so cost per configuration item delivered per AWS account per region, 0.012 for periodic recording, or 0.003 for continuous recording.
Yep.
So this is where we can get into trouble, because for things that are changing not very often, this is not an onerous number.
Correct.
But for things that are changing all the time, this can add up very quickly.
Correct. So the nice thing about config is that you can actually turn it on service by service. You don't have to turn it on for everything all at the same time. But when you start using, one of the insights that we had recently, because we found a case that was very interesting. When you have serverless services, anything like Lambda or RDS or Aurora serverless, or services like that, turning on config doesn't make any sense at all. Because when you have something that's serverless, the configuration changes are managed by AWS, and they happen at such an insanely fast rate. I mean, that's the whole point of serverless, right? You don't want to be sitting and managing your capacity and your resource utilization and all of that. AWS does an amazing job of doing this very, very frequently, on a per minute basis or a per second basis. It can handle all of that for you. But when you start recording that in config, and you're recording every little configuration change for a serverless service, you're just adding to tons of events being recorded, which costs you a bomb, and then storage of that, which is another big cost associated with saving all of that information. And as we've noticed, that data never goes away. It just sits over there. You don't know what to delete, what not to delete. It just accrues cost day in and day out.
And not just that, but it becomes very unactionable data, right? Because
Totally.
the whole point of servers is you're not managing it. It might be a silly comparison, but okay, one of my security cameras, there's a spider that makes a spider web right across it. And when that happens, and then it gets windy, all night I get alerts. Why? Because the spider web is moving across the sensor. And it's the same thing, right? It's just this useless alert of this change of state that
Correct.
I really am not interested in. I'm interested in when a person walks by, not when a spider web shifts by a centimeter. And it's the same thing with config, right? You're interested in anomalies. You're not interested in changes that are expected. And like I said, with Lambda or with other serverless, the point is they can drastically change their usage depending on various cyclic behaviors.
Exactly.
So don't pay to then monitor that.
Correct. So use AWS config wisely. Use them on services where auditing the changes that happen to the configuration really matter. EC2 instances is a great example of where I think that using config is incredibly valuable. Anything that's serverless, just avoid it. You really don't need it.
Yeah. Okay. So you things like Aurora serverless,
Lambdas, all your OpenSearch, any of your serverless, abilities, Neptune serverless, it doesn't really matter.
All right, that's good advice. Okay, so the summarizing: don't use AWS Config for serverless because you are monitoring something which is expected to change frequently. And unless you really, really, really have a good reason to, it's kind of a square peg in a round hole situation. You really don't need to do that.
Not only that, the volume of data and events that come out of these serverless services is, in some cases, orders of magnitude more than the events that you would generate out of your other services like EC2. So the costs associated with these serverless ones, which are completely, like we discussed, non-actionable and it's just a waste of money. Those are way more expensive than what you would spend otherwise on something that's useful.
Yeah, and just like CloudTrail, right? You just want to be aware that you're not double paying.
Yes.
And with CloudTrail, what gets you are those key management events, because those tend to happen a lot.
Correct.
So only store one copy.
Correct.
And we have a finder fixer for that as well. The delete duplicate CloudTrail finder fixer. That's a really neat one.
Yep.
Got a blog post about that. All right. So this is it's funny. You always think, okay, are we going to have a lot to talk about? And the answer is always yes. This is a very fast moving time. We're going to have more AI content coming up. There's what are you doing to learn more about AI, by the way?
So I have a very interesting tool. Hopefully, I am going to be done with it in a week or so. I've been using it internally. It's not very presentable, but I have tools that any article that I study, or the analogy that I use is it's almost like my second brain, where I don't have the ability to remember all the stuff that's happening, but I record all the interesting articles, all the interesting things that I read up. I record them into a system. It's basically a RAG-based system, and it allows me to summarize every article. So the system itself summarizes and gives me digestible snippets. But at the same time, I can then combine a lot of these, articles and blog posts and everything that I read, and then create more content for me to consume. So it's almost like reprocessing, over and over again the same set of articles, but marrying them with other concepts and other interesting things that I come up with, and having, basically building new neurons or new connections between this. So building my knowledge graph effectively of all of the interesting developments that are happening in the field of AI.
Yeah, that's really, really neat. And I've been working on, like I said, I have my Hacker News crawler, although I got throttled from Hacker News. I'm using, I found a really neat API to follow some Medium folks that I really enjoy following. There's some great people on there. I've got a Twitter list, so I'm using the Twitter API for that. And then plus, since you can have things like Amazon Bedrock, you can use your own personal data. So another thing I want to enter into my personal knowledge base is every Google Doc I've created in the last week, right? And you can have that and say, okay, what are in the news and what am I thinking about, and what can I use from the latest week to help me with what I'm working on in my Google Doc, where I have to do marked on this line. And you can really, like you said, you can have this very big picture view, bringing in all the context and not just what's in your immediate short-term memory.
Exactly.
But things that you want it to be in your short-term memory, but without the capacity constraints that we have.
That's exactly right. Awesome.
Cool.
So we'll be sharing a lot of that as we develop this more, and I'm looking forward to that.
Absolutely. All right, Raul, have a nice evening. And guests, thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate it. Happy New Year. And we'll see you every Tuesday. And then on the Fridays where we've got the Gen AI content, we'll just check out the CloudFix LinkedIn or Twitter, YouTube, wherever you follow us on the schedule. All right. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Some tools just find AWS cost savings and make you do all the work. Visualizing cost opportunities is great, but that's not enough. CloudFix, on the other hand, actually delivers those savings for you. And you don't need to worry because CloudFix fixers are AWS recommended and easy to use. It's the only tool that fixes cost savings opportunities and doesn't just find them. It's the easiest way to save money on AWS. It's all 100% automatic and risk-free. And the best part is that it works non-stop. See for yourself. Click on the button to get a free demonstration of CloudFix and stop overspending on